Hello, my name is Sherri Antonetti, and welcome to Gaithersburg Book Festival workshop on I Don't Have Time to Write, and I'm going to tell you, yes, you do. Um, I am a writer, I'm a blogger, I'm a freelancer, I've written 2 books, and I'm also a teacher and a mother of 10. So if you tell me you don't have time, I'm going to tell you right now, yes, you do. That's the first thing I would share with you. Um, I have some slides, but before we get to them, I'd like you to make sure that you have a notepad and a pen, not because you need to take notes, but because I want you to think about the fundamental question of what kind of writer do you want to be? Some of you may love poetry. Some of you maybe are dreaming of having a book published. Some of you may want to be a journalist. I myself wanted in high school to be Lois Lane. Um, and So I want you to really think right now about what is the penultimate dream you have as a writer. I know all of us want to be like J.K. Rowling and make gazillions of dollars and to be beloved worldwide. But before we get to that point, where do we want to go? What do we want? Where do we want to see ourselves next year? Um, want to be the one giving the presentation at the Gaithersburg Book Festival? That's where we want to be. Then this is how we start. So that's the first question I want you to really think about and maybe write down what your dream is. Because if you know, it's like in writing, when you write a story, if you know what the ending is, you can get there. If you know what your dream is, you can work towards it. So it helps to have a defined objective. In this case, maybe becoming a published author, maybe becoming a freelancer, maybe getting an article published in a magazine or in a newspaper. So figure out what that goal is for you, and then you'll have an easier time getting there. I've got some slides, so I'm going to share my screen just a moment. So the first thing is to inventory yourself. I hope all of you can see this, and please raise your hand if there's a problem or a question. But what kind of writer are you? And with respect to that, what do you already write? So if you already do write once in a while, or when you're inspired, or maybe you've been writing poetry, but you haven't shown it to anyone, what kind of writer are you now? Do you keep a journal? Do you blog? Do people ask you to take the minutes at a meeting because you summarize things beautifully, or to draft the emails? These are the questions that I hope that you really examine fully, because that's what really matters about writing, that you know enough to know what it is you're trying to do. Second question is, what kind of things do you read? Because that also reflects what kind of writer you're going to be. What you feed into your brain is what's going to pour out of your pen. I personally read a lot of nonfiction, and so I've become much better at writing nonfiction. But I also have read a lot of mythology, and I have a lot of fun when I write stories that go into the supernatural. And so really what you read is it will affect how you write and what you write. So those are things I want you to think about, because that was part of how you will start. But you're thinking, wait a minute, Sherri, this is about how you don't have time to write. We're going to get to it, don't worry. But part of it is knowing where you're going. So what does finding the time to write really mean? It means making the time. And there are 3 simple steps. One is setting a writing time. Just like if you were going to be start a exercise regimen, you would set a time to go to the gym. You would put it at the same time because it would make it easier to get to it than if it switched around every single day. Set a writing goal. I recommend a word count as opposed to a word time period, because then you have a point at which you stop and a point to which you push. I recommend 400, 500 words a day. If that seems like too much to start, then start with 100, but build up. Irma Bombeck wrote a 450-word column every time. All of her columns were 450 words. And they're brilliant, and they're pithy, and they're strong because they had that superimposed limit of how long they would be. So that's what I'm wanting you to do. If you are someone who writes, but you haven't yet really kind of pushed, this is how to push, is to set a writing goal per day. And it can be anything. It can be I have to write a poem a day. Just move, jog the brain around the park is what I'm asking. And setting a writing place where you will write. This one I'm a little more flexible with because I write anywhere. But when I first started out, I had a desk and I had a computer and I sat at the desk and I wrote on the computer. And for a time there, I was like, I'm going to do a page. And that was my goal. And then I learned I'm going to do 500 words a day. And that really helped me to, one, not go over, which I could, which I often found meant I was repetitive. It also made me edit, which is also good. And so that's my recommendation. If writing is a goal and a dream in your heart, then please start with 100 words a day. If you can't do 500, but just start and make it an everyday thing. Put it on your to-do list. As much as taking a vitamin, exercise, going to pick up the groceries or whatever is on your to-do list, put that on your to-do list. It's part of what you're going to do. Writers write. Writing is a habit. If you give yourself the parameters of a habit, it will work better for you. So that's what I mean by about making the time, by establishing that it will be part of the day. And yes, I've written it any hour of the day, but if you're trying to make this something you're going to really internalize, this is part of it. But what about my friends, my family, my job, my house, pets, my career? You have the time. Reality of life interfering also means you always have something to write about. Life happens. Making a plan for writing means it's part of what will happen in that day. And if you have a really bad day, you've got a fantastic column. How you survived it, how you recognized you needed to survive it, all the things that went wrong. The best columns we ever read are like the epic moments where somebody talks about everything that went wrong and then how it suddenly righted. Those are fantastic things to read. I do keep a pen and a notebook handy because you never know when you need it. The writing fairy clubs me over the head all the time. Sometimes I'm dashing things off on the back of envelopes. If you look at the papers that are in my purse, they've got scrawl over them. I have envelopes that just have tons of things written on them because I'm thinking, I'm like, oh, that's good. And I'll just start scribbling it down. Of course, I can't read my own writing, but I do write it down. And it does help me then to recall it later. And I don't limit myself to one particular type of writing. So if I hear somebody say something really smart, I'll write down what they said that struck me, because I want to keep that, just to ponder it. Writers ponder things. They reflect on it. And a lot of times I find out what I'm thinking because I've started writing. And once I start writing with my pen, all of a sudden I discover, oh, I think that. So that's what I'm going to tell you. And then the other thing that keeps people from writing is they're convinced that it has to only be good words. I want you to be okay with writing things that you don't want to see published, because you're going to write some stuff that's going to be essentially junk food, and it's going to be okay. It's not whether or not everything you write is brilliant. It's whether or not you write sufficiently to gain a proficiency. That's what matters. I'm going to stop for a second and ask if there's any questions about what I've talked about or anything you want me to go into in greater detail. I'm going to guess that there isn't, but if you have a question or you want me to go back to something, raise your hand, and the Gaithersburg Book Festival people will be happy to let you ask a question. Do we have any? I see we have someone raising their hand too, but I can't see who. So I'm sorry, I can't see who has a question. I would love to be able to answer it.
If you just go ahead and click on the attendees tab.
Thank you. Okay, I see Diane Betsy has a question, and then I also see after that, Murtro Robinson has one. So we'll go with Diane first, and then to Murtro. Okay, go ahead, Diane.
Dan, you're
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay. I think I forgot the question. Okay. I couldn't raise my hand because when you first made that statement, we were in a screen that had like white writing that you had typed, and you couldn't see the hand at the bottom. It wasn't until you switched back to your face that I could see the hand to click on. So I just wanted you to know that's why nobody was responding. The hand wasn't in the window.
Well, that's part of the process. I say, does anyone have any questions? And then
Now
it takes a few seconds for the screens to switch, and then we can respond to it.
I got it. Okay. Okay. All right. Honest to God, now I'd have to see the screen again. You were talking about writing, I think, junk that you said it was okay to write. Everything doesn't have to be perfect all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I, for the, okay, I think I got it now. You said something about you don't write the same thing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You write what you feel is important at the moment. Here's my thing. I like to write poetry, but I like to write letters to the newspaper. I also like to write stories.
Mm-hmm.
I take classes at Montgomery College Germantown campus, and I love the classes. It's just that I can't concentrate on, do I want to be a poet, or do I want to write a column, or do I want to write a book? I keep vacillating back and forth between all those things. And I think to myself, probably am not a good writer because I can't seem to hold on to just one thing that I want to write.
Most writers are more than one type of writer, because it isn't that we like writing a particular genre, it's that we love words. And it's okay
I
to
lost
do,
you. You love words. Okay.
that we love words, and
Okay.
we're more interested in, that we're inspired by current events, or we're
Yeah.
inspired by a homily we heard, or we're inspired because we think of a story and we think that would be really fun. Don't let yourself be afraid to explore those venues. The way to become a writer is to write, and I write poetry, I write plays, I write anything
Plays.
that comes
You write
anything
plays.
into my that comes into my head gets put onto the computer, and it's fun to explore the different venues. So I wouldn't put yourself down because you're interested in more than one type of venue. I think when you want to go to publishing, then it becomes an issue of tailoring what you're presenting. So you don't go to someone and say, I've got a book and it has writings and it has plays and it has poetry and it has a story. No, one thing. Publisher, publisher. Okay. But I want to get to the other question. I see there's a couple more questions, so I hope that answers it. Be at
Thank
peace.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Murtro Robinson had his hand raised. And then it looks like Karen O'Keefe after that. I butchered your name. I'm so sorry.
No, you said it right the first time, Murtro.
Okay. Murtro. Okay.
Yes.
What can I do for you?
I have I've had a stroke and I have aphasia, which is I can't speak readily all the time. I can't even write. What do you suggest for me? I want to write a book that's inspirational, spiritual, education, and medical, so that people who have this kind of cognitive deficiency can know that they can write, even if it's have a ghostwriter or something like that.
You have a powerful story to tell, and you've managed to say it to me. I know there's text to talking,
Yes.
and I would recommend using that.
Okay.
And if you have a family member that can look over what you're saying in case there's a word that's not quite what you want,
Mm-hmm.
that's how I would adapt for that, is try to tell your story that way so that it then could be published, because that is a powerful witness and it certainly is needed.
Thank you.
So thank you and good luck to you. That's strong. I'm very moved.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Karen O'Keefe.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today. I used to be a columnist, and I'm trying to write a novel now, and I feel like I'm a hoarder of words and hoarder of. You talked about the notes in your purse and things written on the back of envelopes, and first of all, I have all these old journals that I'm holding on to, thinking that I'm going to find some word of wisdom in them, and they're just weighing me down, just looking at me from the shelf in my office. And I was also wondering, so I think I need to just get rid of all that stuff for my novel. I even though some of them have these little gems in them that are I might be able to use in conversation, dialogue or something, I'm thinking that they're holding me back more than they're helping me. And as far as the notes in your purse, do you sit down at the end of the day and collate what you've got, or what do you do with all that?
Well, it depends.
Thank
I'd
you.
love to tell you, sure. First off, my heart goes out to you. I understand holding on to all the notes. I have drafts of a book that are sitting because I can't quite bring myself to let go of them.
Right.
But that's really, if it's causing you grief to have these there, like they're a nag, that's a drain on your spirit, get a chest and put them all in there and just shut it. If you need it, you'll go back and find it. It'll be there. As to the novel, if you're stuck in the novel, there's a section we haven't gotten to about writing books and how to get through. Writing your first draft of a book is a marathon. And that's really what you have to think of it as. It's just a one slog marathon. And the first book I wrote, I was very proud of it, but I also know I made every error known to man in writing in it. So I call it my beautiful Frankenstein. I love my creation, but it's a mess. And I think we all have those in our writing life. Do I collate all my stuff? Not always. Sometimes I look at it afterwards and go, why did I think that was important? So, I write junk on the envelopes too. If it's important, I'll start to type it in, and I usually have tweaked it by the time I get done. Like I use it for columns. And so you know how that is. Once you've written the column, honestly, I fire and forget. After after I've written it, I'm done. So that's how I would say put them away. If they're weighing you down, put them away. Don't
Thank
throw them
you.
away, because then you're going to feel anxious, but put them away so that you don't have to think about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We can go back to I'm going to go back to sharing the screen of my column so that we can go forward. Can y'all see what I'm doing? Or I want to make sure can y'all see? What about inspiration? I want to make sure that y'all can see what I'm presenting.
Not yet.
Not yet. Just a second. That's what I was afraid of, is that it's not. Just a second. It's got frozen up. Sorry. My apologies. There we are. Share. Okay. And let's make this much bigger so that's not super teeny on the screen, which is annoying. Okay. Okay. Some of you, I've talked to several of you who are already writers and are already working on pursuing some long-term goal that you have. For those of you who are beginners or new to this process, I want to say a word about inspiration. Waiting for inspiration is something that guarantees you won't do what you could do. That was one thing that a writing coach told me, to write uninspired. As I said, be willing to write junk, because quantity will eventually result in quality as you grow in skill. It's like running, and I liken it to running in part because I have a son who runs. He runs every day, even if it's raining. Writing every day, even if it's not a particularly good poem. I'm not putting down poetry. I just know that I'm not a good poet. But making sure that you do it is a form of mental discipline, and it reminds you that you are a writer. And writing is one of those professions that you only are when you've done, and you're only as much as you have done. So you always are, great, I got a column published today. What am I going to do for tomorrow? I mean, that's instantly where my brain goes. It was that the last bit of brilliance that I was going to have. The other thing that happens to me is I look at when I read what I've written, I'm going, oh gosh, I could have written that better. I do that a lot too, which is why I've adopted the fire and forget. I write, I edit it until I'm sick of it, and then I submit it. And then I don't look at it again, because otherwise it will drive me nuts. But the lesson I want you to learn from Master Yoda me is there is no writer's block. There's writer's will and writer's won't. If you cannot think of anything to write, then write about the fact that you're really frustrated because you have no ideas and no inspiration, and you think maybe you're just a hack. And I guarantee if you start writing that feeling, all that, you will open a vein and it will pour out. I have had days where I wrote, I have nothing to write. I have nothing to write. I can't believe I have nothing to write. I have 10 children. How can I not have a story? I have written that, and eventually something comes out. So I promise you, if you make yourself scratch out some words every day, you will find words that are worth scratching. So that's my bit about inspiration to all of you who are new to this process. How to get better. My best advice is learning about writing more, and my favorite books on this subject would be Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott and On Writing by Stephen King. I know some people don't like Stephen King. I don't read his horror because I can't handle horror. It freaks me out. But his writing on writing about the process of writing is very good. Eat Shoots and Leaves, because none of us are perfect at grammar, is very useful. And of course, there's always the elements of style, but that's very dry. But learning the mechanics of writing is important. It's necessary. Especially if you want to be published, you have to be able to write in a way that lends itself to clarity. I am the master of the run-on sentence. I write like I talk, which is constant. So I have to really pare myself down when I write. Find experts and listen to them. I have some favorite places to go to learn about writing and the writing process. I'm biased, I admit it. I put a couple of my favorites. Absolute Rights, where I first cut my teeth as a writer in the forums, because they did critiquing, and I can't emphasize the need to be critiqued enough. It is unpleasant to be critiqued. It is like going to get a swimsuit and looking in the mirror and seeing how much you didn't hit the gym. That's what critiquing does to your writing, but it also is invaluable. So I've gone through Absolute Right, where you get people saying, this line's not funny, this line's not clear, what did you mean by this? Or they argue the point, and then you learn how to respond to that, how to deal with it. Writer's World is another critiquing group I belong to. Not everybody's cup of tea, I'm going to say that, but I happen to like it because the person who runs it and the people that are critiquing it, they are very straightforward. They tell you what's what. If they like it, it means you wrote something really solid. And if they have critiques, the chances are there's something worth listening to. When I say find experts and listen to them, I mean it. Especially as you get further along. It's very easy to listen when we're all starting out, when we're the rookie. It's much harder to listen when you start to gain some level of expertise. So cultivating a humble attitude towards your own work by going through the critiquing process, even if you are established, will help you to become a finer writer. And we all want to be fine writers. One of my favorite, I have a couple of writing tricks I do. One is practice the basics, picking a literary device. For a time I did it each day, and just incorporating one into your writing for that day. It makes you, it's like practicing the scales in music. It makes you see, I'm good at these metaphors and similes and what it does is it makes you have more tools for writing. Like, from my English class, hyperbole, alliteration, repetition, assonance, irony, similes, chiasmus, one of my favorites. And I don't know how to say zeugma. I suppose I should learn it, but I do like them. where you use wordplay and the word means is one thing for two words. And I think, just go to one of those. I give you a website, literarydevices.net, and pick one a day. And that's a good way to help you with starting the exercise of writing every day, just to pick a different one each day. And if you do, and I've tried to find out how many literary devices there are, and I can't seem to find a solid number to pin down, but it will give you plenty of material for getting started. I'm going to ask again at this point to see if we have any questions.
None at this point.
Okay. Another tip, which I have used, I don't use as much because printer ink is expensive, but I used to print up my columns and read them aloud. And it is by far the most effective editing device other than another set of eyes known to humanity. So if you can stomach it, I recommend it. These days I read it, and don't read it to yourself, because you will add words, eliminate words. You will not see the errors that you have in your writing. You have to read it aloud. It will make your writing pop. It will tighten it in ways that you would not possibly imagine. So that's my critiquing on your own writing, how to get better. Okay. So I've gone over this before, but I'll just remind you, writing, whether inspired or not. So if you have a good idea buzzing in your head, write it. Even if it goes nowhere, it's always good practice. My blog is where all my unloved pieces go. I get in the habit of cranking out 500 words a day, and joining a critiquing group to give you honest feedback and inspiration. It also will help you with on the day when you do get published and someone other than your mom says, I don't love it. Your mom says it's wonderful, and then somebody else says, well, this is a problem. Being in a critique group helps you to grow what's called a lizard skin, which you need, because it hurts when you get a bad review, or it hurts when you get a critique, but it makes you learn that you can survive it and you can get better because of it. So, and writers are we're a crazy group of people. We get very protective of our babies, and at the same time, we're constantly critiquing it, but we have a hard time when someone else does. So I recommend the critique group, again, as a method of helping you to grow as a writer, regardless of where you are in the writing process. Okay. This is something I have as a policy. You should always be reading something, writing something, editing something, and submitting something. We've talked about reading, we've talked about writing, we've talked a bit about editing. Now we're going to get to submitting. Now, some of you are writing books, some of you are writing poetry. As I said, I've done a lot of columns, so I know this process fairly well. And so I put this column in there for the freelancing process explained. I'm not going to read all that to you because it's a lot of verbiage, but I am going to explain the process to you. Whatever you read now, like newspaper or magazines or blogs, that tells you something about the kind of writing that you like to read. And that might be the kind of writing that you could do yourself. I'm sure any one of you has read something where you said, I could write that better. Look at the website of whatever it is that you like to read. And in the About Us section is usually what's called submission guidelines. Read the guidelines. If they take queries then you've got an in to possibly getting published there. What do? You write a query with the possible article attached. Hello, my name is Sherri Antonetti, and I'm a mother of 10 and a freelance writer. I saw that, I'm interested in writing for your publication because, and then you explain what it is. I know that people are struggling with Zoom lessons, and and I know what it's like both as a parent and as a teacher, and I could use that as a hook to then explain what I'm going to do with my column. And then you get a response. Yes, we'd like that column. Can you please submit it to us? Here are the guidelines. And they'll give you a word count probably. or thank you, thank you for considering us, but we're doing other stuff. Either way, you say thank you. Why? Because editors are the gatekeepers to being published. And if you decide to burn a bridge, I can guarantee you that door is not going to open for you. So recognize that when you're knocking on the door, that you're presenting yourself to them as someone they might want to have a working relationship with. And that's what you have to establish. Who you are, why you're the person to write this, and why they want to pay you for your words. And yes, I said pay you. I want you all to be paid writers. That's my goal. So one is to submit queries if you have some ideas for things that you think that their readership might like. 2 is to ask the editor if there's anything that you ideally could cover for them because of your situation. So if you have a particular venue or slant that they might find appealing, I might submit to a publication that focuses on special needs because I have a son with Down syndrome. Or I might submit to a parenting column because I've got 5 teenagers. And so, what do you have to offer? Your expertise, your personal background story, your faith life, your philosophy. These are things that you can present in your query that will make the editor think, that's an interesting person, and I'd like to read that story. And if you can get them to say, I'd like to read that story, you've got an in. And that is the process of it's submit it, research, submit, as a proposal, and wait for a yes or a no. And then lather, rinse, repeat. That's what you do. I did give you some do's and don'ts. They were learned the hard way. Don't submit a piece to 2 different places at once. It's bad form, and it probably eliminates both markets for you. All your material that you've already written is pre-published if it's been on a blog. You can't even plagiarize yourself. And don't present a false vision of yourself. Obviously, those are all things we take for granted, but they're reminders that the whole business of writing is authenticity of voice. And if you don't sound authentic, if you're not authentic, it will eventually bite you. So that's a critical tip of freelancing. For those of you who want to write a book, and I know this dream, I've written 2, and the first one took 7 years. It probably could have been done in a year if I had known what I was doing, but I did not. The second one took 1. I want to write a 3rd book. I haven't figured out what that book is about yet. But number 1, know where you're going, the end you hope for. And I want to have a book about this, and know what your ending is. You can change your ending, but start with knowing your destination. Know the tropes of your genre so you can upend them. No one wants to read another story that is of an 11-year-old wizard who was an orphan and the chosen one. We want a different story. Know the conventions of what you're hoping to publish in terms of size and word count. If you show up with 300,000 words and you're doing children's literature, I promise you they're not going to publish you. So the different genres have different requirements. And this is a question of doing your homework. If you're going to be a writer, you're going to be a researcher as well. And this is the business part of research. And it's just as important as the actual writing. Know who publishes what you write, and also the process. Like fiction uses an agent usually, whereas nonfiction, you can pitch it directly to the company. So I'm going to stop for a second in case there's any questions, and just see, because I've covered a lot of material which might require idiosyncratic questions. Okay, Beth Zimmerman has a question.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I have a question about the queries.
About the what?
Queries.
Oh, queries. Okay.
Do you usually have an article fleshed out before you send out the query?
Well, it depends on if it's a market I've already worked with or if it's a market that I haven't. I will have written the article before I make a submission or before I make a query, but I won't give the article unless it says to include it in the submission guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Diane Betsy has a question too. It's still muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can now.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's this window and I have to remember to keep clicking unmute. You were talking about writing columns, and I was curious, what kind of places do you write columns for? You're not talking about the Washington Post, are you?
Well, yeah, okay. Actually, something funny is that the first column I ever got published was in the Washington Post.
Really?
I was the dog that caught the car. But
Oh, no.
oh no, it was funny because I had no idea that that it was completely beginner's luck. I wrote an article about losing my cell phone and the trials and tribulations of going to the store to get a replacement one. It was a humor piece, and it took a year for it to be published, but it was accepted, and I couldn't believe it.
Oh, so,
But
so you, all right, I didn't know just anybody could submit a column to the Post.
well, you can. There are different sections that take things. In particular, there's a section in the style section that is geared towards women. I don't remember what it's called. It used to be called. I can't remember exactly the name of what it used to be called, but there was a column for a while where they took things, submissions that way. So what you do is just look, any magazine or newspaper has submission guidelines where people can submit things, not just letters to the editor, but actual columns. I've written for my hometown paper, which is back in Beaumont, Texas. I've written humor pieces for the Island Park News in Idaho because they read something of mine that they liked, and so they asked if I would write for them, and I said sure. And I admit I do a lot of writing for Catholic publications, so I have columns in the National Catholic Register and on the Catholic Standard, and I used to be part of a regular contributor to a Family and Faith blog, which was a Catholic blog that they did. So that's been kind of my comfort zone as of late. But but it can be anywhere. I find you have more luck with whatever is local to you, to be quite honest, because why would San Francisco necessarily want to hear from me living in Maryland? So if you have some connection to a place, you're more likely to get the attention of the editor.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any, so I think we can go back to the shared screen. Just a moment. And share and move me out of the way. So, all right. This is some business stuff that I've learned along the way that I think might be very useful for anyone who's getting started on writing columns or trying to submit things to magazines. A bit about magazines, I'm not as successful at that because magazines require that you submit about 6 months in advance. So if you're in June, you should be pitching Christmas, and I'm just not that organized. I can't think like that. My brain doesn't work that way. But if yours does, that's what you do. You pitch 6 months in advance. And I've seen writers who do like writers' calendars where they take the months and they put which places they're going to submit to, which months, so that right now it's May, so 6 months from now would be putting you at November. So you should be pitching Thanksgiving to, talking turkey, and that's what you should be doing to the magazines that you want to pitch to. But for business details, if you're going to submit articles, and I submit 2 a week, and I'm getting ready to try to test out some new markets so I can get it up to 3 a week. Keep an Excel sheet or a Google sheet with what you've written, what you've submitted, what's been published, and whether or not you've been paid. Um, and put the amount in the column so that over the year you can see how much you've made from doing it. And it also helps you to develop a business element towards this, because you can set a writing monetary goal for yourself, which I've done. And also a writing goal, like how many you want to try to get published. Not, and I tell you that because if you're going to try to write regularly, it's useful to have a writing goal, even if you're not doing a big project like a book. So setting a writing goal, how much content, a publishing goal, how often publish, maybe once a month. Maybe your first goal is to get published in a magazine. This year, that's your new writing goal, get published in a magazine. This year, mine this year is to find 2 new markets. Keep a list of places and names and contacts, including the editors, with where you understand the deadlines, the word counts for each place, and that's helpful for you in terms of thinking about writing as a profession. And I have a spreadsheet for each year that I've been a writer, and I can see where I need to work and where I'm doing all right. Hunt for new places and maintain relationships with the ones you have been successful. Burn no bridges. That is my firm rule. Editors are the gatekeepers. There are also people who can tell you where you might be able to get something published if they're not the place. They're experts. They're real experts because they know what gets published and why. So making them someone that you trust, that's an important part of it. And also a little thing about rejection. Rejection letters are part of the process, but it's only a part. It's not the whole story if you keep at it. And that's the big thing. You don't stop writing because somebody said they didn't like it, because you didn't write it because someone would like it. You wrote it because it was necessary for you to write it, and you like it. And that's important. So these are my tips, just business tips to help you with becoming a more polished professional. And then I feel like I'm blathering on, but my final thoughts on this whole process of finding time for writing is that writing is a labor of love, and writing is always an ongoing thing. Whatever you did yesterday doesn't count towards today. So if you want to say I'm a writer, it means you write. And setting a time for it is something you have to just put into your calendar. We all have the same number of seconds a day. And so that's just, I think you have to decide, this is important. This is necessary. And the one thing I want to emphasize to anyone who's afraid, who fears, what if no one likes it? Or what if I'm not published? Or what if, writing requires that you trust your voice, that your voice has something powerful and beautiful and true and worthy of being shared. And you may need to work at crafting it so that everyone can hear it, but it doesn't mean it shouldn't be shared. A little tip is, it doesn't mean you have to be intimate about the details of yourself, but you do have to ring true when you say it, whatever it is that you say. And just a few samplings that I've gotten from people talking about what they're doing and why they're doing it. There's a lot of beautiful voices that need to be heard. And so I can't wait to read all of your beautiful things, your beautiful poems, your beautiful books, your beautiful memoirs, because they are part of what the symphony that we need to hear. And so please make time, because your voice is important. I will take any and all questions that people might have. Okay, I've got 2, Murtro first, and then Leslie, I think. Hello.
Hello, it's Murtro.
Yes.
I've been well, I have 2 articles written that I didn't pursue. One was by WebMD,
Hmm.
and the other one is by National Association of Aphasia.
Hmm.
And I'm surprised they liked the article, but if I want to write on my own and solicit people to read it, I don't know how to do that.
Okay. Um, this is for a column or for a larger work?
It's kind of like a inspirational handbook.
Okay. So
So
it's not, okay.
yeah,
All right. Part of that would depend on what you're working on your inspiration from. Or is it, would you
life
say it
experiences.
is, okay, so, okay, so it's a personal testimony, so it's nonfiction.
Right.
And does it have a spiritual component to it?
Yes,
Or,
it does.
okay.
And I want it to be for young young adults, people who have had trials and tribulations, as I have.
Mm-hmm.
As I told you, I had a stroke,
Mm-hmm.
and I have other things too,
Mm-hmm.
and that are going through life thinking that no one's looking out for them, no one cares about them, and I want to give them inspiration so that they can look forward to what they can do.
Okay, that would be something you'd look for, publishing companies that publish inspirational works that include personal stories in them as part of their component. I'm very dialed into the Catholic publishing companies around, so I know some that do that from the Catholic perspective. But what I would tell you is, whatever your denomination is,
Mhm.
that they have inspirational material that not necessarily your story, but is adjacent to what your story is, in terms of someone going through a trial and wanting to share that with other people. So that's where I would look first
Okay.
in terms of this. Is I would the WebMD, if you were doing a medical one that's helping, like they say, doctors to learn about how to care for patients or how to help families deal with things, that's one venue for writing about your experience. But what you're talking about is like a spiritual book to help embolden people to act and to live and to thrive.
Yes.
And so I would be much more inclined to look at publishing companies that do work with nonfiction and particularly with spiritual counseling.
Okay.
So I hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. Leslie Kamenshire, and I see that Diane Betsy also has a question. And anyone else, if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll be happy to answer them. I promised I'd be here, and I'm more than happy to answer. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Sherri. I very much enjoyed your presentation, and I'm just wondering if you do any coaching.
Well, I'm a teacher and I'm a mother, so I guess. But
Oh, I mean professionally. That's what I meant.
I honestly never have done that. That I'd be happy to help people, but I've never done that, honestly.
So it's okay to talk with you.
Sure. Mhm.
Okay. So, and how does one reach you, or?
Well, the contact information for me is, I think, in the profile. Sherri Antonetti Writes is my email.
Okay.
And so you just put my name together and put Writes at the end of it. Like
Put
she
what,
writes
please?
funny
Put what?
writes, like she writes funny stories
Oh, I see.
at yahoo.com. And the reason why my email is that is because when I first got a new email, I was told you should let the people know what you do. And so I did that, and I've been too lazy to change it ever since. So
Got it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the things you said. I appreciate that. Thank you.
my pleasure. Leslie, okay, Diane. I'm still waiting for the sound. Mm,
I
There we
did it
go.
again. I am so sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, I have to remember to punch that button. I seem to remember in the library at some point, isn't there a book of all the publications for magazines or something like that?
Oh, there definitely is. Since everything's online now, that's why one of the reasons why I recommended
Oh,
absoluteright.com and their forums because in
absolutely
their
right.
and it's in the slides, so any of you can look there because they have a whole section called paying markets.
Ah,
And so that's why you want it. Okay. That's where
okay.
you want to go. Or Writer's Digest. Or, these are ways, those are simple ways to get to it. But also, as I said, every magazine, every blog that is a published blog where they actually have writers for it, you can submit to. You can submit to Real Clear Politics. I've never gotten in, but you can. So if you have a particular, don't be afraid to submit. The worst they can say is no, thank you.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What do you think about writers groups?
I love writers
Is it
groups.
worth it?
Yes, I love writers groups. I belong to a writers group. I belong to, as I said, the Absolute Right Forum for a very long time. You can find a lot of my writing that I did early on there. Um, if it's not been, ground into the internet um, memory hole. But absolutely, writers groups are useful because you get multiple eyes looking at your work, and they can tell you what's working and what's not.
And then
And
you tell them what you think of their work. Is that how they work?
yes, and you do it, if you're a good writing group, then you do it in a way where you don't simply come up and say, your baby's ugly and untalented. You do it in a way which tells people, I think you were trying to get this relationship across and this didn't quite work, or this felt cliche, or this could have been stronger, or, had you thought about this? And honestly, having an extra, really the feedback is the strongest thing you can get because it helps you to really tackle what you can't see. We don't see our own flaws in our writing.
Yeah.
And so I can't say it enough. I'd love to hear from some of the other people here, what you're writing, what you're worried about. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to take them. I realize I've been yammering around a lot, but I do want you all to know that it's very important that you not quit. Whatever it is you're doing, you have a reason you're at this particular workshop because you want to write something and your voice matters. So make a goal with yourself today, a date with yourself today that you're going to write 500 words and then do it again tomorrow and the next day and the next and the next and the next and the next. That's what I hope from you. Stephanie Yang, you have a question?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So one thing that I have a really struggle with is whenever I start writing, I want it to be perfect, or I go back and like re-edit the same sentence over and over again. So after like 20 minutes, I have one sentence that I'm still not happy with. So how do
Okay.
you get over that?
Vomit the first draft. I'm serious. I'm just think of it as spilled milk. I'm going to pour it all out, baby. And don't try, if you've already discovered what happens when you try to do perfection, what happens? You get one sentence and you get exhausted. Don't do that to yourself. Trust you have something to share, and you're sabotaging yourself by trying to make it perfect before you've gotten through sharing everything. And it takes so much energy to get that sentence perfect that you're not going to get to the full thought that you wanted to render. Let yourself write the whole thing. What kind of writing do you do?
Usually I do fantasy / sci-fi stuff.
Okay. What might be useful for you is, you know, are you writing short stories, or are you writing books, or are you writing, what are you writing? You know, fantasy, that's a genre. I want to know what you are
Oh,
writing.
short stories.
Short stories. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So short stories. That's good. Before you start writing, you know, kind of have a guess of your ending, and then just pour out till you get to the ending,
Mhm.
and tell yourself, I'll get back to it, and let yourself get back to it. You'll be surprised at how much freer you feel if you let yourself do that.
That makes sense. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Um, Perfectionism and anxiety and doubt are the hobgoblins that destroy good writing. Because if you try to be perfect, you won't get to write what you need to write. You'll only get through what you've done, and you will be emotionally exhausted by the process. If you are anxious that no one will like it, then you won't write at all. So, see, I want you to just fling those off of you and just write from the heart, and trust that your heart's good enough that it's got something to say. Anybody else have anything they want to ask? Okay, we have about 3 minutes left of this workshop, so I'll be shameless plug at this point. If you'd like to see some of my other writing, you can read my first book, which is called The Book of Helen. It was a historical fiction about Helen of Troy, where I tried to weave all the disparate myths about her into one plausible narrative. I'm also available at sherriantonettiwrites.blogspot.com. That's my blog. I link to anything that's been published, and I also link all my I put all my unloved pieces that I decide, oh, I should put something up on my blog. I put them there. And then I have another book which is linked through the Gaithersburg Book Festival, which I wrote under a pen name. And that's really all I have to share. I've enjoyed being here with all of you, and I look forward to reading what you have to share. And thank you.